So we are here in the mid-afternoon, and we're gonna pick up 3 bills this afternoon. We're gonna start with H 477, which Judiciary sent us right before crossover, and then S 94 to look at final revisions, and then spend a minute on the Fire Prevention Safety Fund. So if you, Michelle, could take us through what they sent us, that would be great.
Yeah, so for the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel, and we're looking at H 477 as introduced as a committee bill from House Judiciary. So this is changing the marriage license fee. So if you're going to get married, you go to your town clerk and you pay a fee to obtain your marriage license. You'll see in section 1, the current civil marriage license fee is $60. 10 of those dollars are retained currently by the town clerk, and then the remainder, and then $35 goes to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund, and then the remainder of the $15 goes into the general fund. And so you see what's being increased is the total fees being increased from $60 to $75. The amount retained by the town clerk is being increased by $5 to $15. And then instead of $35 going to the special fund, it's going to be $60. So out of that $75 will go to the special fund, and $15 will be retained by the town clerks.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
What draft is that? That was as introduced?
That was as introduced, yeah.
I still don't have the
Okay.
new draft, I just have the one you sent me.
Do you want me to, do you want to make, do you have a copier?
Yeah, that works. Okay. And so Ted will explain this all in more detail, as will Sarah when they get in, but essentially, we have talked before about the hole in this fund that is, continues to grow, and Judiciary sent this over to us, doing some very proactive work to take care of some other things that they had done that had reduced the fund. But their great work resulted in a hole in the general fund. And so we have another amendment that I've asked Michelle to draft with some help from Ted to perhaps keep the general fund whole while fixing the special fund. So we will.
And I can talk generally about it. Just the concept is the amendment would be increasing the fees that are paid to the court when someone is getting divorced. And so there is currently a filing fee. So when you initiate and you file your papers in Superior Court, then there is a fee of, I'm trying to see if I might have it, version of it here. There's currently a fee of $295 when you file your paperwork with the court to initiate proceedings in family division, and that's being increased to $360. And then there's a provision that if the divorce or annulment complaint is filed with a stipulation for a final order, a stipulation being that essentially the parties, have agreed on all the matters, and so they've kind of done it themselves, or they've worked with an attorney and everything is agreed upon and the parties have signed the agreement and you're filing that, so you're not asking the court to kind of sort through the property issues or things like that. So that fee is that if the divorce or annulment complaint is filed with a stipulation for a final order, and there can't be any minor children involved because the court always wants to review that to make sure that it's fair and the children's best interests are being protected. It's right now it's a $90 fee. If either one or both parties are Vermont residents, and that's being increased to $110. And then there's a provision there that if neither party are residents, there's a $180 fee that's being increased to $220. But, and you'll see in Ted's fiscal analysis, there were not any of those fees collected in, I think, last year. And so he didn't project any being, and that is because the general rule is you either one or both parties have to be a resident of Vermont to be able to file for divorce here. But there is a provision in there that I hadn't ever noticed before because I don't know that it actually ever really gets used. Clearly not according to the fee schedule, but and that is if neither of the parties is a resident of Vermont at the time of the filing. However, they were married in Vermont, so they obtained a Vermont license and got married here. They don't have any minor children, and their marriage is not recognized in their home jurisdiction. And so while that is technically possible, because not all states' marriage laws are the same. So for instance, you can marry a cousin in Vermont, but some states you cannot enter a marriage with a cousin in that state. However, because of the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution and similar language in federal law, for the most part, even if you couldn't enter that marriage there, if there's an established marriage and you're behaving and holding yourselves out as married, and especially if you have minor children, the other jurisdiction is going to recognize your marriage and you could avail yourself of those courts. But so there is this fee for out-of-staters, but I don't think you're really going to probably see much money from that. So
That's really fun, thanks.
sure.
Yeah, really. So this says for the benefit of the state, that's the general fund?
Which one are you looking at? Sorry.
2,
Okay.
line 8.
I presume so, but Ted's going to go over that.
So essentially, the underlying bill increases the marriage fees. The amendment makes the bill increases the marriage fees and the divorce fees.
Right, but the key about the underlying bill is that there's no money going any longer to the general fund. It would be going to the special fund.
Any questions about this bill language or the amendment? Thank you.
Sure.
Very much. Really appreciate it.
Sure, I'll stick around in case.
Okay. Sarah. Welcome to Ways and Means. We don't
Thank you.
get to see you here.
No, I don't have the pleasure to be with you very often. For the record, Sarah Robinson, I'm the Deputy Director at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And because I'm not here very often, I thought I'd just take one sentence to tell you a little bit about the network in case you're not as familiar with our work. We serve as the statewide voice for victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence in Vermont. And we are a membership organization. Our members are 15 local nonprofit organizations that serve all of your communities. And last year, those organizations together answered about 20,000 hotline calls from victims of domestic and sexual violence and provided in-person services to about 8,000 victims in Vermont. So we're very grateful for your work on H477 and grateful for the work of House Judiciary as well to allocate a portion of the revenues from marriage license fees to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. That special fund is currently projecting about a $350,000 deficit due to declining revenues in the fund. I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about what the fund is and what it does. It was established in 2008. It's set forth in 13 VSA 5360, and it is administered by the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, which is a quasi-state agency. And the fund really serves as a primary revenue source for services for victims, as well as systems that improve responses to domestic and sexual violence in our state. So the revenues for the fund are comprised of a portion of two revenue sources. The first is a surcharge on criminal and civil judgments. And of this surcharge, $7.25 goes to the general fund, $10 goes to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. And a $60 and a portion of the $60 marriage license fee that you're discussing today. And of that, currently $35 goes to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. I just want to say really broadly that Vermont does fund a good portion of victim services through fines and fees, as well as federal funds. And today, you all are discussing the marriage license fee. It is the least regressive of the two sources of revenues for the funds. But big picture, we really feel like the state needs to move away from using fines and fees to fund these critical victim services in our communities. And we look forward to conversations that this committee and others may have in the coming years about how we can do that. So the fund itself provides approximately $900,000 annually to support victim services. And revenues from the funds are used in a few different ways. Almost half of the fund is passed through directly to the local domestic and sexual violence organizations in your communities. This is done using a funding formula that accounts for variables such as population, geographic area served, and the services that are provided. Additionally, about $90,000 per year is distributed to these organizations as direct support for survivors. That's used for immediate expenses like housing, transportation, other basic needs. The fund also provides revenue for the Deaf Vermonters Advocacy Services, which provides services to victims of crime who are deaf, deafblind, or hard of hearing in Vermont. Helps fund Safe Space at the Pride Center of Vermont, which is our only statewide anti-violence organization serving the LGBTQ community, and also helps to support the Vermont Council on Domestic Violence, which is also set forth in statute. So in 2022, JFO, as I believe you are familiar, issued a report on the status of all of the crime victim special funds and made recommendations for potential policy solutions, because the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund is not the only special fund, unfortunately, that is experiencing declining revenues. But on this particular fund, the policy options included a recommendation to dedicate the entirety of the $15 general fund share of the marriage license fee to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. So while this would result in the $70,000 loss to the general fund, the draft that you're considering today of 477 enacts this proposal and in parallel process adjusts the annulment fees for inflation to offset the loss to the general fund. So we very much support this, the current draft of the bill, and are grateful for the work of this committee and House Judiciary to help us address the loss in revenue in this fund.
You mentioned this as being a less regressive fee. Can you explain?
Yes. So right now, the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund is funded by a surcharge on civil and criminal fines and fees and the marriage license fee. And, certainly it's our perspective that people who tend to be justice involved have a lot of complicating factors in their life. We know that the criminal legal system disproportionately impacts low-income people in our state. And so ultimately, we don't think that levying fines on people involved in that system is a just way to be funding victim services in Vermont.
And I think that my understanding from the Judiciary Committee is they picked this up because they had reduced or eliminated some fines.
Correct.
In bills that have come before us and that we've approved. And so this was sort of their attempt to make good on that. Yeah.
So I remember when this was initiated in 2008, and it bothered me then, and it still bothers me now, although I know it's not directly part of this bill, but the thing that bothers me is the assumption that the marriage is going to end with somebody beating up somebody else. That is not true. It is not true. It is not true most of the time. And I don't like that assumption. And in fact, there are many men and women who shudder at the, being assumed that they're going to do that to their partner.
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to that and say that we actually don't think that there is certainly domestic violence happens within the context of intimate partner relationships. We don't actually think that there is a relationship between marriage itself and violence happening at all. Similarly, the other source of revenue for this fund is civil fines and fees such as traffic tickets. No actual relationship between traffic tickets and domestic and sexual violence. And I think that that's a point that's well taken, and another reason that we should be looking much broader at what our revenue sources are and ensuring that our revenue sources are in fact connected to what we're funding, and we're funding those things with intention.
What are your thoughts for other sources?
Ultimately, I think that we have to have I think that the Joint Fiscal Office report that was issued on the crime victim funds does lay out a wide variety of policy options. I think that those are worth considering. This is just one of them. And ultimately, I think that those are going to be some policy decisions that the General Assembly is going to have to make about fines and fees versus general funds and what the appropriate mix is.
I haven't had a chance to read that report, but I will. And I'm glad to know that other sources are being considered. And so there's nothing about marriage fees in here, right? It's only the divorce fee?
The underlying bill has marriage fees and this adds divorce fees to it.
The underlying bill,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I haven't read the.
We have a confusing thing happen because the emails weren't getting to Sorsha. And so we have a printout of the amendment and then we were looking at the underlying bill online. But,
Thank you.
yeah,
Anything else? Thank you all very much.
thank you. I really appreciate it. I think we're going to take a brief pause while we find our next witness.
The bill we just,
Yes, go ahead.
is a teeny-weeny piece of it, as Carolyn remembers, a larger discussion that's not part of our work this afternoon on how these fees are paid for.
Yeah.
We've taken it up before and haven't been able to make really substantial progress, but I suppose at some point we'll need to.
I would really, I think it's important to be doing what we can to patch these funds that have sort of widening gaps while we can. And I would really like to work on language this year that sets intent to be looking much more broadly at this. And so I keep on saying it, but I mean it. And if anyone
Okay, I'm glad you mean.
wants to start working on that language, I think we need to understand the full and have the administration's support to look at the full scope of all of the special funds and how much money it would actually cost and what revenue would be needed to move all of those funds into the general fund, or if that's the most appropriate thing to do. But it's a big project to do. Yeah.
Gee, it's almost a summer study committee.
It's like, I think it is even maybe it might be like a multi-summer study committee. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'd like to put language somewhere to sort of take that next step of doing that analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts before we